What's going on? Welcome back to the Reet YouTube channel and to part 5 of the mighty RB20 AU build. In the last one, we got all the lines and fittings plumbed up thanks to Zoo Performance. It's starting to look spicy. I know you all love it when I say that word. In this one, we're going to be doing all the wiring. We got a beautiful Link ECU, thanks to our boys at Link. This is a R34 RB25 DET Neo ECU. Goes inside of the factory R34 ECU case and bolts in straight in your R34. In this one, I'm gonna be showing you basically how to wire an RB25 or any really Nissan engine. They're all basically the same into any car you want. Universal information, trust.
What's saying?
So yeah, I haven't done something like this before, kinda, not really. So I'm gonna work it out a little bit as I go. It should be pretty straightforward and I should be able to show you guys exactly how to do it. So I'll try to be as informative as possible. What we have is, like I said before, the Link ECU. We got a lambda sensor and a couple other sensors to go with it, like idle air temp, not idle air temp, like air temp and manifold pressure. We have a RB25 DET Neo loom. I believe this one was off a Stagia engine that we bought. We have the factory R34 ECU, so we're going to be pulling this apart, and the Link ECU just goes in the factory case, so that way if you were bolting the ECU into your Skyline, it'll be plug in and bolt in. That's why they're Kang. That's convenience. And then over here, we have the AU stuff. So this is the AU ECU. It's got the old TI Performance J3 chip from when we turboed it. And then the AU engine harness. This big plug plugs in to like the intake manifold area, and that's where all your sensors and everything runs off from there. So that's why the loom looks a bit bare at the moment, because that's not plugged in. These things are pretty basic, the engine harnesses. They basically both, like most cars from that era, they plug into the ECU, they tee off just after the ECU, there and there. So that's basically where they tie into the body harness and get all their powers, grounds, ignition switches, speak to your cluster and ignition barrel, and that's where they tee into the body harness. And then they run out to the engine and control the motor. Straightforward, kinda. What my idea is, basically, this plug plugs into the AU body harness and gets all the body loom stuff that it needs. So I'm feeling like I'm probably gonna chop that off the AU harness, move it over to here, and then use all the right wires on the RB harness and basically pin these wires into that plug so I can plug it straight into the AU loom and run our RB off it with the RB ECU. That's my thought process. We'll see how that goes. First thing you're gonna need is some wiring diagrams. I went on the internet on my phone yesterday and dug up some wiring diagrams. They can be a little hard to find sometimes. I think you're supposed to pay for them. So if you want to pay for them, it's probably easier to find. They're usually in the owner's manuals. You can find the wiring diagrams. But if you dig hard enough, you can usually find them without paying for them. So that's what I did. So I just looked up an R34 turbo wiring diagram. I got that. That'll show me the ECU pinout and everything else I need to know. And then I downloaded a Ford 98-02 owner's manual. And I believe that has the wiring diagram in that. That's it, and then the car just wires itself once you got diagrams. First thing I'm gonna be doing is stripping back the loom we're gonna be using. I'm not gonna make it from scratch. You can buy most of these plugs and pins and make them from scratch. I made the Wagons loom completely from scratch, all brand new motorsport wiring, and not happening. Definitely reusing this loom, but I am gonna cut off all the old sheathing and conduit and re-loom it, and also cut off all the plugs we don't need. There's a lot of stuff in these harnesses that don't get used, like right here, that's all the factory boost control solenoids. We got a lot of stuff we're not going to be needing. We got like mass airflow sensors, which we don't use because we use a map sensor. Oil pressure sensor, which we're not using. We'll be using Bosch oil pressure sensor. I'm going to cut this loom off, strip it down, cut off the plugs we don't need, and then I can start to loom it up. We're just going to be using some of this car builders. Is it car builders? Yeah, car builders. It's like a Teflon-y, nylon-y tape. It's not the cloth tape. The cloth tape is nasty, especially in engine bays. If you get like oil leaks and stuff, that cloth loom tape soaks up the oil and goes really nasty. I rate this stuff. It looks good. Car builders stuff. You'll see the loom when it's done. It'll look half decent. You can get like a whole lot of other looming stuff. Unless you plan on unpinning all the plugs, you can't use like the self-closing finger trap style braid sheathing. You can buy some cheaper stuff that goes over the wires without having to slide it on the end. We'll see how fancy we get. I just tape it up, because don't get, anyway, I'll start cutting this old conduit off. I have a loom. I'm done. What I did, I chopped all that out, because don't need. I chopped all that out, because don't need. Chopped all them off, because don't need. Where do I start? So the loom branched off here. This is straightforward, right? This is engine harness. So we got crank angle sensor, coolant temp sensor for the ECU, earths, VCT or VVT solenoid, injectors, idle air control valve. I just kept the brown one. The purple one is a bump up for AC. We're not running AC, so we don't need that. The brown one, idle air control. Got the 2 TPS plugs because we're running the Neo TPS because it's a Neo loom. So I changed, I think it's a non-Neo 33 throttle body, so I just chucked a Neo TPS on there so that the loom suits it. And then our coil pack plug. So the coil pack and injector sub looms already on the car, ready to plug into them too. And believe it or not, that's all it needs. As well as some aftermarket sensors we're gonna put in, like the wideband, the intake air temp, map sensor, not running knock sensors. So there is the 2 knock sensors that go under the intake manifold. The wires are still gonna be there. It's just a single wire, like shielded home signal. What? It's not like the home. It's a shielded wire. I don't know. Knock sensors don't do shit really. They do and they don't. They're not really gonna do anything, to be honest. They're gonna be detecting knock all the time because the thing's going to be rattling its head off. It's got solid engine mounts. You don't need them. It's a myth. Don't quote me on that, but it's a myth. So I still got to re-loom it all. So that's the engine, more or less, very basic. So then it branched off here. Mass airflow sensor we're not using because we're replacing it with a map sensor. There was a whole lot of aircon stuff which we're not using. There was a whole lot of, this is an automatic loom. So a lot of the stuff I chopped out is for the auto, like a big plug like that and all the wires. That's all the auto stuff. You probably have a lot less wires to work out and chop if you get a manual loom, but this is an auto loom. So all the auto stuff's been ripped out, all the AC and heater stuff is ripped out. And that's honestly, most of the wires, I spent a lot of time just, before I chop most of the wires, I trace them. So if they go to the ECU plug, you just look up your wiring diagram, find out which pin it is. Really important to make sure you're looking at this plug the correct orientation. Same with every electrical plug. 9 times out of 10, the photo that you're looking at in the diagram is looking at where the wires go into the plug. So the back of the plug, not the front. It's a little trick for you young players out there. Catch you out. It'll get ya.
Has it got you before, mate?
Yeah, back in the day, mate, back in my day. Caught me out a couple of times. So more often than not, you're looking in the back of the plug. And then the orientation, you look at these grooves. These grooves are usually on the diagram. 2 grooves there, 3 grooves there. So when you're looking at the diagram, you'll see the grooves. Can't have the plug that way, you've got to have it that way. Looking at the back, remember that. So yeah, I trace them back to here, look at the diagram. Oh, pin, say 24. That is for auto stuff. AC stuff. Don't need chop, 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 chop. I am gonna unpin them just to make it neater. So you just pop these plastic tabs up. You got to put something in the front of it that's really, really, really small. So like maybe Corey's or something. Cut. That was all like the sub harness, like body stuff. Traced back. All right, don't need. Chop, 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 chop. This one, this is what connected to the body harness as well. Now, some of them, like this one, this is an ignition on signal. Tells the ECU that the ignition's on. We'll come back to that in a minute. And it also gives power to your injectors. The injectors don't draw much current at all. They're just a solenoid that turn on and off. So they are actually just turned on. So this actually goes to your ignition barrel where your key is. So when you turn it on, it tells the ECU that we're turning on to ignition and gives power to the injectors. So it doesn't run through a relay because injectors don't need much power. It tells the ECU to turn on. So the ECU then grounds this relay here. So I think they call them an ECCS relay or an ECU relay. It'll ground this relay, which turns the relay on because the relay has constant power. When it grounds it, turns on, gives the ECU its main power back. So the ECU turns itself on. How fancy is that? It gets its on signal, grounds the relay, which turns the ECU on. The reason they do that is because then when you turn the ignition off, the ECU stays on for a few seconds and saves data to the ECU. And then the ECU will break its ground to this relay, which will in turn turn itself off. The ECU turns itself on and off. This relay also supplies our power to our coil packs, to our main coil pack power wire. So that needs a relay because that pulls a bit of current compared to the injectors. So as the ECU turns itself on, it also gives power to the coil packs. We have our main power feed for that relay. So that'll be a constant 12 volt. And then there's also another constant wire, a constant power for the ECU, a constant power for the coil side of the relay. If that makes any sense.
Nah, I've zoned out.
Maybe you're following along, maybe you're not. I said I was gonna be informative, so I'm doing my best. Also on this plug that goes to the body harness, we had a start signal. So obviously your start signal will send power to the starter motor, but at the same time the ECU needs to know that you're trying to start the car, so it needs to also send power to the ECU when you're trying to crank. That way it'll start detecting for its home signal from the crank and cam angle sensor. RB's run a crank and cam in one, the CAS. So yeah, that's that. That's the start signal, so pretty self-explanatory where that wire is going to go. We've got a fuel pump wire which ran through the body loom. So that's going to be a ground coming from the ECU to turn the fuel pump on. So that will ground a relay which will then go turn the fuel pumps on. So that way the ECU will prime it when you turn the ignition on, and then it'll turn the fuel pump on when the motor starts cranking. ECU controlled fuel pump in a nutshell. We also just have an ignition, a switched ignition 12 volt. So this just gives power to our VCT solid, VCT, yep, and our idle air control. So that's just 12 volt switched wire, and there's also a switched 12 volt which goes to the ECU. Oh, and one of the TPS. So obviously one of the TPS sensors is the twin plug on the Neos. By the looks of it, one of them has a 12 volt on it. I don't know why, because usually TPS is a 5 volt. Might blow up when I wire it. I don't know, I'm pretty sure that's right. That's your RB wired. Simple as, oh, there's one more. There's like the simple shat is the tacho. So the ECU has a tacho output wire. Same as, like I'd say it's the same deal with the AU. Just cut that back a little bit. We'll get to how this is gonna tie into the AU loom in 1 second. But yeah, that's the tacho output, so we can send that to our cluster to get a tachometer, an RPM gauge, a tachometer. Not all the time that's going to actually power your tacho. Between different cars, they have different signals coming from ECUs, and different tachos need different signals. You can buy a decoded digital box that some people use for aftermarket tachos. You might have seen them in 4-wheel drive and stuff. Ever heard of that, Adam? No, Corey knows what they are. So you can buy boxes that transfer the sine waves from your ECU to be compatible with the tacho that you're using. Science! Science! You better put in some fucking Breaking Bad right there. Basically, that's where that went to the body harness, and over on the AU loom, this is where the AU loom went to the body harness. So I should be able to pull these wires out and then pin in the ones coming from our RB loom. So in here should be a fuel pump wire. I can put our new fuel pump from the RB ECU in, same as the tacho ignition switches and stuff. I should all be able to get from here because that plugs into the body loom of the AU. So I should be able to sort of take that, put it on the RB loom, and it'll plug into the AU. Along with some minor adjustments, the alternator, starter motor, both are a sub loom that is not in the engine harness. They connect to like the factory fuse box that's in the engine bay. So I'll have to do a little bit more wiring there. A lot of the AU stuff's still here, ready to go. So that's like the main power cable for the starter motor. The grounds and the alternator plug from the AU, from the intake, and the alternator power feed wire. There's the alternator feed wire and the alternator charging wires. So they will basically just get adapted to the RB. If you tuned out, apologies, but thought I'd just explain it as best as I could for those who actually give a shit. Yeah, everything's pretty good. I need to work out the lengths for everything and where it's going to sit in the engine bay, and then add some wires in for our aftermarket lambda, intake air temp, and map sensor. Once I run that, I can re-loom it all up and start connecting it to our AU body harness plug and go from there. Don't do wiring, kids. Stay in school. We're making progress, believe it or not. It looks like I've done nothing for the last 8 hours, but I have a loom. I just pulled it back out of the car. I had it in there. I think I mentioned at the start of the video that I haven't done something like this before, and I have no idea what I'm doing. It turns out I've only ever worked on Jap cars when it comes to wiring, and AUs are wired very differently. Everything I can find on the internet for the wiring on the AU is absolutely rubbish. It tells you FA. What I'm going to be using. There's this plug that plugs in on this side of the AU harness. I was able to use 5 wires out of that, if that. From that plug, the body harness, I am able to use potentially the fuel pump wire, so I can use the ECU to trigger the fuel pump relay for the factory pump, and then install a new relay for our external 044. Our fan control, so the ECU controlled both the thermo fans, so there's fan 1 and fan 2, so I'll use the link ECU to trigger the fan relays to bring on the fans. Some grounds and an ignition 12 volt. That's all I could get out of that plug and utilize with the 34 loom. Then the other plug that had 1 billion wires in it, which I've unpinned basically all of them. It won't work with our setup. I'm able to use another ground. Wow. The tacho wire, tacho from the 34 ECU will connect to that, and that'll send to the cluster. Whether it will actually work or not is another question. The AU cluster actually accepts. You can change it a little bit in the ECU. So that's our constant 12 volt. So the AU ECU used that as they call it a keep alive, or the memory wire. A little bit different to how the 34 one works with the ECCS relay. It turns off by itself, which I explained earlier if you paid any attention. I've got a constant 12 volt, which the 34 ECU does still need. So I got that out of the body loom. That's it, nothing else is gonna work. The key barrel, so I obviously need ignition, which I can probably get from there. I need start, so the AUs do it real stupidly. Found the wire that gets power when you go to crank the engine. I'm gonna use that to power the solenoid on the starter motor, so it cranks, and also it can be the signal wire to the ECU to let the ECU know that we're trying to start the car. So I chucked the loom in the car, added a couple extra wires. So we got the intake air temp, the manifold pressure sensor from Link, our oil pressure and temperature sensor, our wideband lambda AFR sensor, our Mac valve boost control solenoid. Sick. That's it. I've already started, but I'm starting to loom it up. We got this grommet. The factory R34 grommet is the perfect size for the holes coming through the firewall for the existing AU loom. This motor's meant to be. So I'm gonna start looming it up, unpin all that, tidy it all up, and do a cheeky time lapse, and we'll come back soon with an update. That's a wiring loom trick. It's almost done. Engine side's complete. So I fitted off all the plugs we need. Boost control solenoid, wideband, intake air temp, map sensor. Got a beautiful 4-bar map sensor from Link. That'll sit under the intake manifold. Oil pressure sensor. That's it for aftermarket sensors. I did have one thought. We will need a boost gauge and a coolant temp gauge for the driver to monitor. This factory sensor that usually controls the one on your dash. I'm either going to use that or replace it with just a coolant temp gauge kit, so we can have a digital gauge to monitor our coolant temps. And then yeah, boost gauge is pretty self-explanatory. But that passes through the firewall here. This is all our aftermarket sensors, which I'll be wiring into the expansion loom for the Link ECU. Still got to wire a couple of things on the other side of the firewall, which I need to do on the other side of the firewall. So I've just left this like this for now. It's time to chuck the loom in. And did I mention that we're gonna start it in this video and have a listen. I'm gonna get the lube in, start plugging stuff in. I'm gonna get TJ starting to button some things up. So we're ready for the first start. Just tidying up a couple lines, fittings. We got the water lines finished for the turbo now. Thought Corey made the catch can. Need to put some cheap oil in the motor to give it an engine flush when it first starts up. Fill up the gearbox. Coolant. Still waiting on a power steering reservoir from our boys at Pertec Bayswater. And that's it. So I'm gonna get the loom in, start plugging some wires in. Let's do it. Oh yeah. Let us know in the comments below if you A, think the car's gonna start, or B, think it's gonna catch on fire. Also, hit the like button while you're down in the comment section. True. Can we just take a minute to appreciate the AU firewall holes suiting the R34 grommet? Woo! That! Moving on.
3 hours later.
We've taken an L, boys. We've taken an L.
Yeah, this seems really depressing in here.
Yeah, it is. I have to eat my pain away.
Why isn't it running, Jasse?
Well, we were getting ready for the first start. I was getting real excited and we were filling up the coolant. Taking a lot of coolant. A lot of coolant. And then TJ pressure tested the cooler piping. And we're here bubbling coolant, so that's never a good sign. And then put more coolant in it. By now we're probably at 50 litres of coolant. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the coolant started coming out the dipstick tube. So That's always a bad sign. So we pulled the sump plug off and drained our 30 litres of coolant out of the engine. Now we're at a bit of a standstill. And I'm not so excited anymore. Checked all the basic stuff. There's no coolant in the cylinders. So it's not the intake manifold. It's not the turbo. Only leaves one thing, the motor.
So we're not starting it in this video?
We were so close. We put E85 in it, plugged in the link ECU, she cranked, everything was going good. Downloading a base map, DJ started bubbling coolant. Blame the apprentice, I reckon.
Yeah, exactly. Finger tight head bolts is what I'm putting it down to.
So we're not starting it in this video.
Nah, we're not.
Hopefully next video, and we'll get it tuned.
Hey, thanks for watching. One like equals one prayer. If you want to come pull the motor out, come down right now. Stay tuned. We'll see you soon. This won't be the end for the RB20 AU. To be continued. TJ, what happened, mate?
What happened? It's all in the teacher.
Gang build.
I heard they checking for me, no one checking on me, so I had to go run up a check. I got the message on me, ain't no flexing on me, my attorney gon' call and collect. Blessings on blessings for me, my successes only made them envious, they got upset. I had to put out